Good evening. Thank you. I have a short essay here in the way of a welcome. I thank you all for joining us. I know it means a lot to Al. It means a lot to us. I look across the faces here and see many, many friends of the school, many of you who go back well before my time, as did Al. The essay I'm going to read to you is The Essential Al Price. Al Price came to the School of Architecture and Environmental Design in July of 1977, just as we were preparing to move into Hayes Hall. Hayes Hall, by the way, has now been named by our president to be Bob's house. I don't buy that, but I was kind of touched. Harold Cohen was in his third year as dean, so it's really Harold's house. George Anslovicius was beginning his work to earn the first accreditation for our architecture programs. And Himi Jamal was writing the proposal for what would become the Master of Urban Planning degree. Ed Steinfeld and Hiro Hata would join the faculty the following year. Al grew up in Buffalo, son of a public housing authority executive and leader in Buffalo's black community. He graduated from Bennett High School, won admission to Princeton University, studied sociology, earned graduate degrees in both architecture and urban planning, and ran a program at Harvard to promote opportunities for African American architecture students, and later a community planning office called the People's Workshop. He later taught at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, but he wanted to come home to Buffalo. Al Price was, as Nina Simone sang it, young, gifted, and black. He stopped in to see Harold Cohen and Bethune on the holiday visit home in 1976. Harold, who was shocked by the utter whiteness of the school he had inherited, was impressed by Price and offered him a job as assistant dean. Straight administration, said Al. If you want to hire me, he remembered saying, I'll need an academic title concurrent with my administrative appointment. It's pretty hard to knock Harold back on his heels, but it took him about a year before he came around to agreeing, and we have Al Price. His initial job description was nothing if not expansive. Daily operations, curricular review, research development, community liaison, admissions, and financial reporting, not to mention teaching. There were no associate deans, no development officer, no enrollment manager, no IT manager. There was little IT to manage. I remember those days. There were hardly any secretaries. Al was it. And he did it all. He taught one course a semester. He participated in community-based projects like the retrofit of the Kenfield-Langfield housing development and all the rest. When Harold went on sabbatical in 1980, he appointed Al as his interim dean in his place. Given who'd been holding the store up with Harold all that time, it's hard to imagine anybody else doing it. In 1982, he was promoted to associate professor with strong support from Professor Cohen. He stepped down after 7 years as associate dean to focus and ramp up on the fledgling MUP program. As a housing specialist, he was at the core of the enterprise. An essential representative of the knowledge in the field, he taught housing and social policy. He led graduate planning studios. He taught a course entitled Financing Urban Development, which was the school's real estate development program before there ever was a real estate development program. Al also filled the role of big picture urbanist. He taught a general education course pitched to undergraduates across the university in a late incarnation entitled Design of Cities. Just a simple slice of history from 10,000 BCE to the present. He was steeped in the material, he was excited about it, and his excitement was contagious with students. Al understood that entering students was a means to the end of teaching students, of reaching them. Entertaining students, forgive me. Surely many of those undergraduates looking for a path found their way into our programs because of Al's enthusiasm for cities. Certainly teaching a big enrollment course to all those non-majors helped the school in the revenue department. And he won recognition for his teaching repeatedly over those years. A lot of Al's teaching, however, was one-on-one, and he spent plenty of time consulting with students during office hours. In 1988, Al took over as interim chair in planning following the departure of Jay Stein, and served his own 3-year term as chair immediately after that, a crucial period of growth for the department more than a decade later. He stepped in again as interim. In the institution where faculty are rewarded for focusing narrowly on their own work, Al Price put much of his energy into ensuring the success of the collective enterprise. What we have achieved as a school has depended on his contributions and people like Al, most specifically by Al, to the greater good. He was always there to do what needed to be done. As much as anything, Al Price has been a good friend to me and to many others. In some ways, this is the best measure of any person. We are engaged in a great collective enterprise of learning, and it's vital to have friends to share the work. Al Price has been that always. So thank you, Al, for your stewardship of our enterprise, for your teaching and your service to our community, and for your friendship.
We have plans to embarrass him thoroughly. Our next speaker is Enjoli Hall, who is an alum of our program, but she also shares some deep history with Professor Price. Enjoli, will you join me, please? Like Professor Price, Enjoli is a lifelong Buffalonian and also a graduate of Princeton, although she is switching her institutional affiliation and heading to MIT for her PhD in the fall. And she has something to say.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am honored and humbled to be here this evening to share some reflections on the impact and legacy of Professor Alfred Price. Al Price is many things: a brilliant scholar, astute practitioner, a wonderful teacher and mentor, and a treasured friend. He has inspired and encouraged thousands of students with his profound insight and candor. In my view, he embodies what the legal scholar Derek Bell refers to as leading a life of ethical ambition. That is to say, modeling courage and conviction, integrity, and a commitment to exploring hard questions about inequality. I graduated from the Master's in Urban Planning program here in 2017. Professor Price was my instructor for development finance, and he was also my academic advisor. He taught me the ins and outs of how to read a pro forma. We dug into examples of housing developments that he actually worked on here in Buffalo. We talked a lot about the low-income housing tax credit program and evaluated its potential as a tool for affordable housing development. We'd often sit in his office, itself an exquisite archive of Buffalo planning history, and have extended conversations about urban inequality, affordable housing finance, and the Black intellectual tradition. Large maps of Buffalo census tracts adorn the walls, a literal backdrop to our conversations about the city. Professor Price would talk passionately about social justice, as well as the joys of art and international travel, modeling a really vibrant intellectual life that I looked up to. Beyond the worlds of project finance and social policy, Professor Price also helped me obtain fellowships to support my graduate education. He helped me identify internship opportunities, and even more, he helped me kind of understand and frame the challenges that lied ahead in my own career. In all things, he encouraged me to have a clear sense of direction, a rigorous work ethic, and a devotion to building community. He cut through the nonsense, making complex arguments elegant and clear in only the way that he can. He demanded students to be citizens of the world. It's not sufficient to just crunch the numbers, it's also really important to be an active and constant reader of books and articles as well as your environment. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't make reference to a certain orange bubble in New Jersey. You see, before I was here at UB, like Professor Price, I was a Princeton Tiger, although we were in slightly different cohorts. There are some things you should know about our alma mater. You should know that few people from Buffalo attend Princeton, and even fewer come back. You should also know that Princeton was the last Ivy League institution to open its doors to black students, and that when Professor Price walked through those doors in the 1960s, it was at a time when racial tensions in our country were extremely high. Finally, you should know that in our orange bubble, it is the norm to go to Wall Street, not Main Street. It is the norm to shape federal policy in DC, not to implement it in cities across the country. It is the norm to turn your talent and attention to poor communities in other countries, not those in your backyard. At most elite institutions, they will say, Buffalo, why that place? Urban planning, why that profession? To which I can imagine Professor Price would say, well, why not this place? It's a good-sized city to actually do something. And why not this profession? It's challenging and it's meaningful work when you do it right. His work is a reminder that we are called to something bigger than self-interest and personal reward, that working to better one's community is as important as prestige and visibility. Professor Price exemplifies what this program and this profession is at its best. We're visionary, but we're pragmatic. We're critical, but we're compassionate. We can articulate the challenges and opportunities of a community in both numbers and prose, fluent in the language of project finance as well as power and privilege. All of this underlined by a commitment to the poor and marginal in our society. Now, if that seems like a tall order for one person, Professor Price shows us that it can and must be done, and with copious amounts of style and wit at that. I believe that many of us come to planning, especially here at UB, because we recognize the need and value for these kinds of well-rounded people to help build consensus and plan for the future. But often we enter programs and jobs and we become discouraged. We find that planning and design are often disconnected. Technical skill sets sometimes seem divorced from our true passion and purpose. Conversations around equity and inclusion don't feel concrete enough. Thank you, Professor Price, for flying in the face of these false dichotomies. You showed us it could be done, and you demanded the same of us. You held us to high standards of excellence, both in the classroom and beyond. We are losing a giant here at UB, and I'm not sure if we ever truly deserved him. As an alum, I hope our department maintains the very high bar set by Professor Price's example. I hope our school community interprets his retirement as an occasion to revitalize our commitments to marginalized communities and to the professional development of our students. I know that I will. Whether breaking down barriers for Black students to access higher education, to bridging the worlds of project finance and social policy in both theory and practice, so much of what I strive to do is to live up to your example of what it means to teach with love, to look at the world and ask questions with eyes wide open, to walk with respect for yourself and others, and to always be unapologetically who you are. Alfred Price, thank you for being my teacher. I look forward to sharing the lessons that you taught with me with my own students one day. Thank you.
No sitting for you. It's your time. Colleagues, this is what we've been waiting for. Please join me in welcoming with a big round of applause, Professor Al Price.
I think I'm wired.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. No, Matt's got me covered. Started to open by saying, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. Let me say that most of my students and former students who are here would be appalled that I actually scripted myself. The notebook generally is here, and that's the way I work. But I was fearful that I would be nervous and maybe a little emotional So I've actually written this, and I'll ask you to bear with me while I try to get through it. That was supposed to be the projector mute. That's okay. We're fine. I know where I am. So I want to thank all of you who put forth the effort to attend this evening. Billed is my last lecture, although I fervently hope that that title is not to be taken literally. First of all, particular thanks are due to my dear colleague, Professor Samina Raja, to my friend, Dean Robert Shibley, to my old and very dear friend, Dean Emeritus Harold Cohen, to Professor Dan Hess, my friend and department chair. And I would be very remiss, I didn't know until very recently she was on the bill, but Enjoli Hall, thank you. I'm astonished and amazed by what you had to say about me. I also want to thank Doug McCallum and Rachel Tiemann, who were instrumental in helping organize the presentation. They are wizards with the technologies. And the other longtime person in the department who is here, I don't know where she's sitting, there she is, Donna Rogalski, who many of you remember as department secretary. She just retired a couple of months ago, but Donna and I go back to her very first day on the job at UB. I actually helped to train her. And she retired about 2-3 months ago, and I told her, you could have hung around a couple of months. We could have done this together. So I'm glad we're going out at the same time, Donna. I want to thank all of my students and my former students who made a point of being here, and of course my many friends and colleagues. Thank you to you all. When Bob Shibley and then Chair Ernie Sternberg invited me out to a fancy restaurant for a sit-down lunch about 1.5 years ago, among other things, asked what I'd like them to do upon the occasion of my retirement. I responded, nothing special, please. Just invite friends and colleagues and the many alumni who it has been my privilege to teach to come to the final scheduled lecture in my Design of Cities course. And then afterwards we'll have wine and cheese out in the hallway and everybody will go home. Clearly my wishes did not prevail. Samina explained to me the concept behind the last lecture. And when I told my wife Barbara, she said, oh, Alfred, that's so very nice. You know, you can Google that phrase, the last lecture, and learn all about it, which I did. So for those of you who, like me, are unaware of the origin, the phrase derives from a popular professor of computer and electrical engineering at Carnegie Mellon University, who, when it was discovered at the tender age of 46, he'd been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. He agreed to deliver his last lecture open to the entire university community to share what lessons he had learned about what is important in life beyond the narrow confines of his academic discipline. Now, I'm not aware whether Samina and my wife were engaged in wishful thinking or whether they took like any extra insurance policies, you know. I certainly hope not. So, second of all, let me say to everyone that I have not thus far been diagnosed with any terminal illness. If I may quote no lesser an authority than the late W.C. Fields, rumors of my premature demise have been greatly exaggerated. This is the same guy who, when he did expire, had the following words inscribed on his gravestone. Personally, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. As it is, I am perfectly happy to be retiring here in Buffalo, and I hope to be of some continuing value to my colleagues here at the School of Architecture and Planning, and across the university, and of course to our local civic community. I have always used slide images in my lectures in order to provide concrete examples to my students, hoping that, a picture being worth 1,000 words, they would see the point I was trying to make and be able to connect to that. So once PowerPoint got developed, this old dog learned a new trick. And that meant I could put images up in TypeScript, which they could jot down, right, and then see pictures of what I was talking about. It all worked very nicely. Now, time is far too precious for me to deliver an academic lecture. That is not my intent. But I did want to share with you 2 slides that come from my teaching that capture in a very few words the core of what I have labored to instill in my students. The sentiment that you see on the screen, in my judgment, is at the heart of planning. We will ever strive for the ideals and sacred things of the city, both alone and with many. We will unceasingly seek to quicken the sense of public duty. We will revere and obey the city's laws. We will transmit this city not only not less, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. It's important that we recall that ancient Athens, despite being the home of our modern-day concept of democracy, was in fact a republic, and that not all of its population were citizens. Indeed, in Plato's Republic, the ideal city-state was nearly half slaves, albeit not in the sense in which we understand that term today. Very nearly another third were freedmen, the military plus artisans and mechanics, who provided necessary skilled labor, but none of these were eligible for citizenship, though some few might earn that privilege after many years of faithful service. As a result of these limitations, my second slide, always shown to my undergraduates at the end of my course, Design of Cities, is attributed to another Republican, this time an American, whose name you will no doubt recognize as the 26th President of the United States. The conflict between the men who possess more than they have earned and the men who have earned more than they possess is the central condition of progress. The essence of the struggle is to equalize opportunity, destroy privilege, and give to the life of every individual the highest possible value, both to himself and to the Commonwealth. This uniquely American take on democracy has always seemed to me to be particularly important, perhaps even more so in the days and times in which we now live. It is critical that today's students understand the significance of these inspiring words and sentiments if they want to become planners. My career here has spanned 42 years, and I'd like to begin my reflections with an anecdote about my early experience at the flagship of the SUNY system. In 1977, then President Robert Ketter had been repeating a message to the schools and faculties over and over, hoping, I think, that repetition would drive the point home, right? Bring in more research. Research is the key to our institutional future. External financial support of the university enterprise is critical to our mission. In an attempt to have this point reinforced, Ketter invited the chancellor of the entire SUNY system, Dr. Ernest Boyer, to the Buffalo campus to give the faculty a pep talk. As a faithful citizen, I attended the address in the fancy auditorium of the music department, Slay Hall, out on the North Campus, and much to Ketter's chagrin and obvious consternation, Boyer launched into an address that afternoon extolling the virtues of teaching, admonishing the research faculty to remember that in spite of the importance of research to this particular senior campus, we should never overlook the centrality of teaching to the mission of the university. Chancellor Boyer that day posed a proposition to us that I remember to this day. Jerry Rising, you might have been there with me, and Claude Welch. And I would ask each of you in the audience to engage with this question as Boyer challenged us. Think back on your own pasts, each of you. Isn't there somewhere in your background a teacher who made all the difference in your life? Indeed, in your career. This was answered with thunderous applause. Then he asked us, have you ever gone back and thanked a teacher? Many heads hung low at this point as we reflected upon the truth that most of us had never done so. So then tonight, as I consider the lessons of my life with you, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the many teachers I have had who altered the course of my life by teaching not so much a subject or a course of study, but a set of values that have served as the nourishment for my intellect as well as my spirit. As with most of you, my very first teacher was my mother, but more about what I learned from her later. The first teacher I wish to thank is Miss Alice Smith, who taught me in the 5th grade at Public School 53 here in Buffalo. She was one of those old-fashioned school marms who was absolutely no nonsense in school. But she had an uncanny knack for communicating a sense to her students that you can do it. To all of my colleagues here in the School of Architecture and Planning, as you teach, remember that we are not simply dispensing information. We are seeking to make our students thirsty for knowledge. What I learned from my 5th grade teacher, Miss Smith, was always to encourage others. Thank you, Miss Smith. The next teacher I wish to thank is Mrs. Weta Clapp, my 7th grade English teacher. Of all the teachers I've ever had, no one went farther beyond the job description or even the proverbial call of duty than Mrs. Clapp. And I am certain that she didn't get paid extra for it. But she called out about a dozen of her promising students and invited us to stay after school 2 afternoons a week for what she called creative writing classes. When we would arrive, she would already have erased the big blackboard in her room and written on it a quotation from some famous person. A scholar, a statesman, a poet, a writer, sometimes even a sports hero. She would ask us to take out a blank sheet of paper and to write our interpretation of those statements. She would correct our essays without grading them, but she would write comments upon them in which she offered guidance and suggestions for how our essays could be improved. Often she would have us read essays by distinguished writers that she thought might encourage us to see what she was trying to do. Another thing that Mrs. Clapp did for me personally was she offered to become my speech teacher and public speaking coach. Once getting my parents to agree, she had them get me to school by 7:30 a.m. 3 mornings a week for nearly a year. School didn't even start in those days until 8:20 in the morning. During that 45 minutes, Mrs. Clapp would work with me on my elocution, pronunciation and enunciation, pace of delivery, control of the timbre of my voice. Once having coached me through the basics, she brought in her own tape recorder from home and had me record my speeches, playing them back to me, providing feedback and guidance. Her payday, so to speak, was when I won the Richmond Speaking Contest for the entire city of Buffalo Public Schools. Mrs. Clapp, I thank you for your devotion. It has been an inspiration to me all my life, even when I was not conscious of it. The next teacher I wish to thank is Mr. Dan Kublitz, who taught public speaking and drama at Bennett High School. Because of Mrs. Clapp's early work with me, Kublitz grabbed me in my early high school years, trained me further, and I eventually entered many oratorical contests and was successful. What I learned from Mr. Kublitz was the necessity of preparation. I was on the negative debate team. I was actually captain of the negative debate. And you know, they have affirmative and negative sides. You take on an issue and the teams go at it and see what they can do. He would have us practice in front of our teachers of history, of English, of science. And we'd be debating something like nuclear war. Right? We would prepare counter-arguments to the other side's arguments and put them on 3x5 cards. The job of one member of each of our teams was to listen to our opponent's points. These people didn't speak, they didn't debate, they just listened carefully and planned our responses. Kublitz's motto, be prepared for anything they can throw at you. He instilled in us such self-confidence that we entered every debate feeling we could not lose. Later in my life, I would read Virgil's Aeneid. And the line from that work that stuck in my head was, they can because they believe they can. And Enjoli, that's a sentiment I shared with young black high school kids all over the northeastern United States. They can because they believe they can. Thank you, Mr. Kublitz. The next teacher I want to thank is my high school humanities teacher, Mrs. Elizabeth Neuschel. To get the attention of her honors program students, she convinced our high school principal to let her throw out the conventional wooden, you remember those wooden desks with the metal thing and the thing went up and down, right? She got rid of all of those and brought in tablet armchairs like you'd have in a college classroom. Talk about an environmental designer. Nushel changed the attitudes of us, her students, just by having us walk into a classroom where we felt as if we were already in college. One by one, she would have us excused from our study halls and come to her office where she would interview us personally to get to know us. On the basis of that, she would then suggest an author whose work she thought we might enjoy. In my case, Eugene O'Neill, whose maudlin dramas appealed to the dying hero complex in my troubled adolescent soul. What I learned from Mrs. Nushel was how to appreciate life's nuances, its subtleties, to read below the surface, to search for meaning beyond what was apparent. She gave us a love of the art of poetry, of drama, of good prose writing. She actually escorted us to Stratford-on-Avon in Ontario each spring to expose us to the best of what was available at that time in the Buffalo-Niagara region. Thank you, Mrs. Nushel. Next, I want to thank a college professor who later became my undergraduate thesis advisor in the Department of Sociology, Professor Steve Kleinberg. What Steve instilled in me was inquisitiveness. As a classroom instructor, Kleinberg had a knack for explaining the inexplicable. His course in social psychology was to me a complete eye-opener. Most lecture classes at Princeton in those days were fairly small, maybe 100 students at most, the average being about 50 or 60, with the exception of freshman 101 classes. Kleinberg's teaching was so extraordinary that the university used to have to seat his classes in the auditoria that were reserved for distinguished speaker series. I mean, that seated thousands. It was ridiculous, right? To this day, I can remember details of principles that I learned in Steve's classes. Thank you, Professor Kleinberg. Next, I wish to thank another Princeton undergraduate teacher, Suzanne Keller, also a sociologist. At the time, she was the only woman full professor on an otherwise all-male campus. And as you can imagine, she would have to have been. She was an extraordinary teacher, researcher, and scholar. Following my graduation, I took a job teaching at the then newly created New Jersey School of Architecture at NJIT, and Professor Keller was instrumental in seeing that I was invited to become a member of the visiting committee to the Department of Sociology at Princeton. At a meeting of that committee during my first year of college teaching, Keller asked me privately about my experience at NJIT. When I commented that students at NJIT weren't of the same caliber as Princeton students, she immediately admonished me that I was never to demean any student who I was teaching. Never, ever to place myself above them. Teaching, she explained, is a sacred duty, and my job was to advance the knowledge of each and every student committed to my care, and to assist each in achieving his or her goals. In the same way that a physician does not stop to ask the level of ability of an injured person, their job is to heal. In our case, to educate, not to pass judgment. Thank you, Professor Keller, for that important lesson in humility. Next, there are two professors from graduate school who I wish to thank. The first is Hana Weber, with whom I studied architecture, in particular the design of social housing. To Hana, the most critical part of social housing design was what the architects call the programming phase. That is, the initial step in the design process where the designer seeks to understand the nature of the problem. My late father was a public housing project manager for the bulk of his professional career, and so what I learned from Hana Weber was something that I had experienced at the knee of my father as I was growing up. In design terminology, I'd put it this way: don't design it if you wouldn't live in it yourself. Having survived graduate study in architecture and having made the transition successfully to urban planning, During my final year of grad school, I was struggling to complete my master's thesis on a topic of a new form of urban housing that I was persuaded could help rejuvenate older northeastern industrial cities. Not surprisingly, my case study was Buffalo. I can recall suffering a severe case of writer's block and walking into the office of Professor Julian Wolpert, the distinguished geographer, who was serving as my thesis advisor. I broke down in tears in Julian's presence, saying that I was a failure, that I would never finish graduate school. Julian listened patiently and then very gently explained that I was suffering from what he diagnosed as separation anxiety. He asked me how old I was when I started grammar school. 4.5, I replied. And you went straight through grade school to high school and then to college? Yes, I answered. He said, did you go straight to grad school after college? Oh, no, I said. I worked for 2 years as an administrator at Harvard running a special education project. Okay, he said. And after that, 4 years of grad school here? Yes, I answered meekly. And how old are you now, he wanted to know? 28, I replied. So in fact, he said, you've been institutionalized for 80% or more of your life, including adulthood. Of course, that fact had never dawned on me. Then Julian floored me. He said, you know, Al, you could apply to stay on and complete your PhD here under my supervision. Then you could join the faculty somewhere and you'd never have to leave the bosom of the academy. See, the absurdity of it all hit me in the face and I laughed through my tears. Julian said, look, Al, your thesis is fine. It's interesting work that needs to be done and you're the best person to do it. Now go home, get to work. Just stick with it. Never give up. Never give up. At that moment, he could have been Sir Winston Churchill speaking to inspire the British people in the face of Hitler's onslaught. I thanked him, I left, I finished my thesis on time with my class. Thank you, Julian Wolpert. There are 4 other people from whom I learned important life lessons, though I cannot say I was formally one of their students. The first of these is a man named Harlan Thompson, my first boss when I was fresh out of grad school. He was then the dean of the New Jersey School of Architecture, and during my first year there, Harlan lost his administrative assistant, a young guy named Paul Groth, who resigned to return to graduate school and work on his PhD at Berkeley under the distinguished scholar J.B. Jackson. I mentioned to Harlan that I had some administrative experience between college and graduate school, and if he needed any help in the short run, I would be happy to assist if the work was something that Harlan thought I understood or knew about. 2 days later, he handed me a routine assignment, which I took home, completed that same night, and brought back into him typewritten on office letterhead the next morning, ready for his signature. A day later, another assignment appeared in my mailbox, and I dispatched that one the same way. 2 days passed, and yet another chore was handed to me, but it was a Thursday, so I turned it around over the weekend, had it completed and back on Harlan's desk the following Monday. That same Monday night, Harlan invited me out to dinner and offered me the opportunity to become his assistant dean, keeping my faculty rank, by the way. I hesitated to answer and finally said, I'm not sure I could work for a guy who piles so much work on his people. And he said, well, good grief, I am glad to finally hear you complain. Never forget this. My job as the boss is to push you as hard as I can. Your job is to do your best to deliver, and when you can't do any more, to squeak. That way I understand what your capacity is, and I will never push you beyond your limits. Thank you, Harlan Thompson, for that lesson. I want next to thank the best boss I ever worked for, Dean Harold Cohen here at UB. I understood that part of my job was to assist him, and by extension the school, by helping generate external funding to support our work. As someone pointed out earlier, I started my job here on July 17th, 1977. The first externally funded contract I brought in was in September of that same year. Shortly after that, with a Buffalo mayor newly elected, Harold began to pursue what became known as the Entertainment District Project. You all would call it the Theater District Plan. When the final report on that project was made public, it contained so much detail about what to do and how to do it that the local community was gaga. Some overly zealous newspaper reporter spotted a real estate transaction in the 500 block of Main Street with the name Cohen on it and wrote an article suggesting that the Dean of Architecture somehow held a profit interest in some downtown land deal. I recall vividly the various shades of Harold's reaction: anger, disappointment, resentment, astonishment. But we pulled through it. We cleared the matter up inside of 2 weeks, and that whole matter did not derail the project, of which today we are all beneficiaries. This is what I learned from Harold. We are not here for ourselves. We are here to serve others, to work on behalf of the good of the community, a sacred public trust. Thank you, Harold, for that lesson. The final two people I wish to thank for what I've learned from them will not surprise you at all. My first teacher, my mother, Virginia, and my wife, Barbara. I think the American language, and for that matter, even Standard English, is impoverished because we have only one word to use for such a broad spectrum of feelings. The consequence of that is the overuse, misuse, and abuse of the word love. Oh, I love your new hairdo. Gosh, I love my new car. I love my girlfriend. I love my dog. The list is endless. Ask any 100 people if they'd like to be in love, and they'll say yes. Ask the same 100 to define love, and you'll get 100 different definitions. The deepest confusion conflates romantic love with emotions that are as important, if not more so. It probably doesn't surprise anyone to hear me say I love my mother, but almost everyone understands that that does not express romantic love. Listen to this passage from the 13th chapter of the first letter of St. Paul to the church at Corinth. Some of you will recognize it because it is often read at wedding ceremonies, which is how we get it confused and entangled with romantic, or more accurately, affectional love. Forget that kind of love for a moment and just ruminate upon these words from Holy Scripture. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. How many of us have ever been loved like that? How many can claim to love like that? Think how much better our neighborhoods, our cities, and indeed our nation will be when we reach a point where we are more concerned about being loving than we are about being right. Thanks, Mom. Finally, I want to thank my wife Barbara, from whom I have learned the lesson of forgiveness. Not for what I have had to forgive in her, because that is inconsequential, but for what I have learned time after time as she has forgiven me. None of us is perfect, and we should not hold ourselves to an unreasonable standard. While it is sometimes hard to forgive others, it can be even harder to learn to forgive ourselves. Now, that is the sum of what I think I have learned that is worth sharing. And in closing, I have always terminated my undergraduate lecture courses with a bit of poetry. Partly because one day I was walking across the Princeton campus and there was a construction fence up with the little holes so people could see what they were building. And someone had scrawled in little tiny ink script a quote from William Carlos Williams. "It is difficult to get the news from poems, but men die needlessly every day for want of what is found there." In that spirit, I share with you these lines from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, in which the poet suggests old men ought to be explorers. And he also writes, "In my end is my beginning." The final poem in the quartets is titled Little Gidding, and it begins its final section with the words that you see on the screen. "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." I thank you all for coming, and I wish you Godspeed.
You're not going to have to answer questions. Thank you, Professor Price. It is now your turn who are here. We have an opportunity to ask questions and or offer stories or reflections of your time with Professor Price. There is a mic going around on any side. Questions or reflections? I know people are waiting to say something.
Thank you very much. My name is Eve Hull Berg, and I had the distinct privilege of being recruited to this school by Al Price. I was floundering as a newspaper journalist, and somebody said, you know, you should go to planning school. And I came here, and Al had me all set up before I'd even left the room. And I had the distinct pleasure of working with Al as his graduate assistant. And the thing that I learned most valuably from Al was not to be afraid to stand in front of you and smile and say what was in my heart. Al, I am forever in your debt.
You want to start now? Okay.
I'm glad you decided to retire now. Of course, if you waited 2 more years, I wouldn't be here. And I might have even forgotten what you did. But I remember when you came in, you were the most handsome, the most literate, the most competent, and emotionally wonderful, that it was that time that we said, let's get together. You wanted to become part of the team because you said that I believed in the city and its people, and we did work together very well. That's all I can say for now. I have other things later.
Thank you.
Hello, Al. My name is James Morel. I was a student here back in '88. Al was my thesis advisor. I graduated out of Harold Cohen's program. In an exit program, Harold Cohen said, "You are not an architect. You are a planner. Go upstairs and see Al." So I went upstairs, and 2 great years under Al, and he was my thesis advisor. And I handed in my first draft with a spelling error on the first page. He caught it and handed it back and would not read the rest. So I will say thank you. I appreciate it. and we've become great friends ever since. Thank you.
Yeah, there are a lot of things, but one thing in particular, and I have mentioned this to you before, but I took financing, I think it was called Financing Urban Design at the time, Financing Urban Development. And it was really a lot of fun. It made me work with numbers, which is something that I don't kind of take to normally, and so just to be able to show a little bit of proficiency with that, and so, but all the explanations, all the the economics, we started with Homer Hoyt and concentric zone theory and all of that stuff was really great, and so I graduate, I go on to get a PhD, I go off to teach at Texas Southern. And I frankly just stole that course. So really was not very much different from the way that you taught it. I did have the advantage of calling on guest speakers from the Houston area real estate community, which was a plus. But the bones of the course were the same. So for that, thank you.
Dr. Price, Joe Siebert. Oh, hi. Joe Siebert, class of 13, I think. It's been a little while. You opened a cold email from some guy who said he spends his days climbing through basements and attics and was dissatisfied with doing that and wanted to go back to grad school. And you invited me into the work trailers out there to talk about housing and how I might apply my career in housing in graduate studies. While we never had classes together, I took that as inspiration for a purpose to come here and finish the degree. And 8 years later, I've got a successful career in developing and preserving affordable housing, some of which bears your father's name. So I thank you for the 15 minutes in a sweltering August afternoon in a work trailer that helped give me 8+ years of satisfying careers and making places better in all the ways that you went on to describe.
I'm hoping for exercise around the room, so I hope other people have questions, comments. So I know there are a lot of, Professor Krishna, go for it. Would you please also say who you are, because we have a lot of alums who don't know everybody?
Sure. My name is Ashima Krishna. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. And I just want to say, Al, I have in the last 5.5, 6 years, I have really appreciated your amazing camaraderie and collegiality. And I distinctly remember you were one of the first faculty who sort of welcomed me while I was frankly very bewildered in my first couple of weeks of joining the department, and we went out for lunch, and you gave me some amazing advice on really how to try to balance research and teaching, and I have really sort of internalized that. And I want to say that I really appreciate that you took the time when you probably didn't have to really welcome a new faculty member to the department. And it really made me feel like I was part of the group, and I could really do something here. And since then, you were also part of my mid-tenure review, and I have to say all of your feedback was very helpful in trying to get me to be a better teacher, which I have always really appreciated. And so from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you for being such an amazing colleague. I've had a very small overlap with your career, but I can imagine that just in that small slice that I've had such a deep appreciation for you, that for all the people that have sort of had you as a colleague for 40+ years, I can just imagine how enriched their experience was. So thank you again.
Hi, my name is Bart Roberts. I am a former student of Al Price. I was really fortunate to have actually two great mentors when I was a student here at UB. One, Dr. Raja and Dr. Price. It really made my time here really special, and as I was transitioning in graduating into my early career in planning in Buffalo, I was kind of frustrated with how things were going and felt like I wasn't really fulfilling my potential. And there were several times that I reached out to Dr. Price for advice, and he gave me great advice. I didn't really listen to it. And that being said, I think in my own way, I did certainly take it with me, and it's helped me guide professional decisions that I've made throughout my career. So I'm forever in debt to you for your great wisdom, and I don't think anyone could give a lecture with their hips the way you could.
I was one of Bart Roberts' hockey coaches. I want to thank Al for a very personal thing. There are a number of us in this room who are members of a group called the Pundits. We meet the second Monday of every month from October through June, and we read papers that we've written about other than our professions. And for a decade or so, Al has been our secretary. And every time that those papers are given, them 17 of them a year, Al writes the minutes. He's part of the glue of the Walter Mitty experience that a lot of us have on those second Monday nights. And when I lost my wife in 2016, he reached out to me in a very spiritual way that I have always appreciated. Bob Shibley is also a member of the group, and there are 6 or 7 people here tonight who I think are very grateful for the glue factor that Al provides to this admittedly very sexist men's group. I want to thank you, Al, personally for being there when I needed you. You may remember a conversation we had. I was chairman of the capital campaign for the Darwin Martin House restoration, and we were kind of right in the middle of the end of that when Connie died, and you came and put your arm around me and told me to get back in the game, and I always appreciated it. Thank you.
My name is Paul Tran. I'm actually a graduate of the undergraduate program. I was, that ultimately I went on and got my urban planning degree at another school down the road from that little orange bubble called Rutgers, and I don't think Al has ever, forgiven me for not going to Princeton. But nevertheless, I was a lowly architecture student coming out of Syracuse that had to transfer home because I had a death in the family, and I thought I was just going to continue my career here at UB and finish up in architecture. And I took that course out on the Amherst campus called The Design of Cities. That's when I met Al. And yes, he taught me that cities were more than just buildings. They're about people and community and all that blah, blah, blah. And it really sunk into you. You're using lots of quotes here today from T.S. Eliot and from Holy Scripture and things like that. I'll tap into the things I know best. Old movies. My favorite quote from an old movie, it's not that old, it's from the movie Tucker, about Preston Tucker inventing a new car, had a financier played by Martin Landau, who was a Jewish financier, elderly, came to him to try and get money for his dream of building a new type of car after World War II. And on his deathbed said to Jeff Bridges, my mother, when I was growing up, said, don't get too close to people. You're going to catch their dreams. Later on, he found out that he didn't understand her through her broken Yiddish, and she actually said, don't get too close to people, you're going to catch their germs, not dreams. But regardless of that, you've infected a generation of two of planners by the simple thing of saying, we have the power to make people's lives better. And I thank you for that.
I'm not sure how it happened, but Al finished his lecture before time. So we have an opportunity for more comments and reactions if others have. We do have a guest who is going to speak, but I want to make sure that if people are moved to share what's in their heart and mind, please do so now.
Good evening. I'm Brian Cachote. Like my friend James Morel, you were my thesis chair. And the one thing I took with me every day for the first 17 years of my career, I've since changed gears, but I moved on to different adventures, was a lecture that you had given one day that told many of us in community development, especially in our community, that it was the ultimate game of patience. And that has struck me ever since. One of the phrases that you used was to be steeled by your convictions. And that has stayed with me ever since. If you perfectly and compassionately believe in what you're doing, then the ultimate game of patience and community development will not defeat you. And that was a perfect lesson, probably one of the best lectures that I ever attended. On a personal note, it's with mixed joy and sadness of your departing for your retirement. I have two mentors in my life, both ironically, or not ironically, coincidentally, from Princeton, the late Paul Kurtz and Professor Alfred Price. Thank you so much.
We may still have an opportunity to chat with Professor Price and our other guests later today. Now I'd like to invite Dean Harold Cohen, Dean Emeritus, to join us up in the front.
Before I talk about, oh, where's the speaker? Okay, sorry. Okay, before I talk about Al, I have to tell you why we came to Buffalo. Then you'll understand why I selected Al as my associate dean. My daughter was at Bennington, and both Mary and I were in Washington. We ran an Institute for Behavioral Research, and she said, teachers are not really caring anymore. You care. Why don't you try and go back to the university? Oops, this is going to be difficult.
I'm happy to hold it for you.
Okay, that's good, because I have. Okay, we came because we had heard that Buffalo was an old city that wasn't doing very well and was looking for a dean. I came with the understanding and the acceptance of the president that I would do two things. One, that I would help create a school of architecture, and in those days, environmental design. And second, to bring the university into the community and the community to participate with the university. When I came, the university was colorblind. The only administrator was the guy who was in community. Right. And he was wonderful. He had lovely stories to tell. When I came then, I had two different discussions. One with the guy, the community development guy, And he said, you know, the black community hates the university. I said, that's a very strong word. He said, because the university comes into our community to do their research, to get their masters or PhDs, but does not help us at all. They use us, and we are tired of being used. My second luncheon was with Bob Cole, who took me out of this very strange boat and introduced me to Bill Gator. From there, I recognized that we needed to do something more than just teach students from books or lectures, but to use the university holding to help get people in the community to help teach us what we need to teach, to help us. This community was in very bad shape. Doug Turner was the head of the Buffalo Courier Express. He took me up to the top of a building and he said, look at it. The 33 had destroyed a lot of the community and things were in very bad shape. Housing was awful. The mayor at that time was a guy who didn't believe his children should go to the university because they'd lose their Catholic viewpoint. The schools were teaching Polish in the South Side, and the mayor approved of that. So that's when we came. I told the President Ketter that I would come under one condition, that I will deal with the university, but I will deal with the community, and if there's problems, he must never attack, he must support it, or just be quiet. That time came when a lot of attacks came because we did participate with the community, and a lot of people did not like that. Some architects felt that we were supporting things like helping the students go this way, building programs for playgrounds, etc., that we were taking a part of the architecture and planning business. And I said, no, we are public servants. We serve. That's our job. So recognizing that there was a terrible discrepancy, I started working with the community, and I met many of the top community leaders as well as the top business leaders. There was a luncheon done by, let's see, where's my name? Oh, Lou Harriman, who was then at the bank, whose uncle was the governor. And I said to him that I cannot come to the city unless I get the support of all the powers that are here, because without the control and the ability to deal with the city, I can't teach. Like the medical school needs people, we need the community. So he called a meeting, and they had all the big shots. There's no question about that. We had Mr. Knox, Mr. Goodyear, Rand, et cetera, et cetera. And when I said, I need your help, there was silence, except all of a sudden, Mr. Knox, old Shorty Knox, got up and said, you will have it. And then everybody said, oh, okay. And he did. He did. So what happened was that I got more involved with the community than I expected, and my poor wife had to do every other Monday we had a meeting with Town and Gown. And at that time they gave me $200 to support extracurricular. We met Al, and there's something about him, and also about his mother. I must tell you about his mother. His mother could have been my grandmother. She looked like a nice Jewish lady, really. And Al reminded me that his father got into Northwestern University because he looked so white. I got into Northwestern University in the evening because they take one Jew out of every 100 and one black every 200. That was the quota system in those days. So I became heavily involved, and therefore it was Thanksgiving when you came to be with your mother that you came into my office. Unbelievably good-looking guy, spoke magnificently, pushy. He had a piece of leather with you know what was inside hanging from him. And he said, I want to join the team. I said, oh, sit down. And we talked. And there was something wonderful that happened that remained forever. He became part of our family, and we became part of his. So all the things that we wanted to do, we did together. I think that one of the things that happened when the community was able to talk to us because they recognized that we were not the enemy, they said, we're not getting our mortgages done. There's something happening, the banks are not giving mortgages to the black community. So I talked to Al and I said, we've got to do something. So I think we got money from Albany, and we got this young, wonderful guy from the anthropology department, cultural anthropology, who was really crazy and wonderful. And we went to work, and we did find out that the banks were redlining, and we stopped it by reporting this to the authorities in Albany. Whether or not they still do this, I don't know. I hope not, because it was important. The other thing was that the black community had no ability to get into some of the universities. And a very special woman, oh my God, hold on, it takes a while for me to remember. Anyway, a wonderful black woman came and said, there's no educational opportunities for our kids in the city. Yeah. No, the other, anyway, so I had an opportunity to be sitting next to the old senator, the old sociologist senator, and I said to him, there is this federal building that sits empty, which is the post office. And he said to me, why do you want it? I said, I think we should produce a school for the community right in the center. And he was really very, very good. He got me the whole building for $1. And then I took the woman, she was a wonderful woman. No. A wonderful black woman who was attacked by the black guy who was, just a second. I thought I had it down here, just a moment. I don't have all my marbles in place today. Let's see. Minnie Gillette. Minnie Gillette said, we need a community school. And so with the $1 and with the ability to have that building, Minnie Gillette and I went to the county executive meeting, and we said, we want to build a school, and we need the money. And at that time, he was the executive director, and he ended up being, I think, the treasurer or for the state. Ned Reed. That's exactly right. Thank you. His memory is better than mine. In any event, so we did that, and we got the money, but there was great power struggles in the black community. It was not easy for young people to make it. They didn't want to be pushed out. They had blacks work very hard for their positions, and they were not ready to listen to any young people. And that was a problem, which we also took care of by training people at night. And one of those people became a judge here, and she just retired last year. So Al comes in, and we decide that we will do what we wanted to do together. We became a family. I hired Sandra Fasikis, the secretary, and, oh my God, Ruth Bryan, and we formed a great team, and we would work late at night to get things done. He's a fantastic writer, as well as a speaker, become a very good speaker. And so together, we made a big difference, and I don't think I could have done it without Al. He was my best and finest choice. My second finest choice before I left was hiring Will Clarkson as an adjunct professor. I also hired your present dean and his wife, plus a lot of people. And I did that without permission from the administration. I did it by myself. I was a benevolent dictator. Because if I used the university, when we'd say something, remember, they refused to do whatever. And I went in and said, no, you can't do that. And so we were able to keep our library, we were able to keep our building, The president called me and says, come take Hayes Hall before they take it. We took Hayes Hall. The president was very supportive. The first time they offered me the job, I didn't take it. Because I looked at the books and I said, I couldn't support a candy store with the budget you've given me. And I would come only on the condition that I have 10 lines and a budget and that you keep out of my hair. That nobody do not protest. Well, it do happen that one of the most powerful lawyers, we were working downtown and a lot of the people didn't like what we were doing for obvious reasons. And so he went and he came to the president to tell Harold Cohen to stop. And the president said, I can't control him. So I was giving a talk, because I always taught, and I was giving a talk and I got a call. The governor was on the phone. And I can't tell you exactly what he said, but it wasn't pleasant. He threatened that the support for the university is in jeopardy. So I yielded. And that was the first time I yielded because I didn't want the president to be upset. And it didn't matter that much. If it really mattered, I would never have given in. So it was interesting when I finally, Mary and I took our sabbatical, there were people in the faculty who wanted to be the acting dean. And when I appointed Al, there were some disturbances. Because you got George S. Levickis from Harvard, you got Peter A. Bannon from the London School, all these big powers, and I gave it to the man who I loved dearly, and I knew who would do the job. He sat, and this is the only person of color at the dean's meeting. This university has grown. I don't know what happened in terms of the equality. I don't know the numbers, but we made a difference. And Al took that year, and with his speech and his power, he helped maintain the school. And when I came back, George and the others had made it possible, so we became accredited. So we did do the two things that I promised to do. One was to get it accredited, and two, to make us powerful enough that people in the community, including the mayor, would come to our office to ask for help. That was quite different with when I first came. People respected us, respected Al, and we were able to do something together. And I think in the long run, when something really happened in my family, my children called Al. We were really one big family, and his mother made the best sugared pecans at Christmas. The best. She was wonderful. And as I said, she could have been my Jewish grandmother. I think the important thing about this school was that it still has carried out its responsibility to the community under the leadership of Bob Shibley, who I hired with his wife many years ago. And I'm pleased at that. There are certain things I'm not pleased about, but I don't want to go to that. But I am very happy that the school is very strong and the community supports it, and we've become an essential organization for the city of Buffalo. Thank you. Remember he used to say, "Shit don't shine." You remember that? Wobbly, yeah.
Thank you, Professor Cohen.
Okay.
As you have heard, and as all of you in the room know, Professor Price has given a lot of his energy into building up our Department of Urban and Regional Planning. I'm going to hand it over to Professor Daniel Hess, Chairperson of the Department of Urban Planning.
Thank you. Good evening. I've had the good fortune to know Al Price, I think, for more than 24 years now. First, when I arrived as a MUP student. Later, I came back as a junior faculty member, and I looked to Al for mentorship, and ever since then as a colleague. As Dean Shibley mentioned at the beginning, Al Price arrived at UB as a new faculty member and an administrator. It might be unusual for an assistant professor to begin his or her career path as a faculty member and an administrator. He was appointed as assistant dean. Associate dean, yes. Thank you for the correction. But we haven't talked about this too much tonight so far, but this reflects Al's accomplished and easy style of leadership. A born leader, he easily navigates people, policy, and institutions to improve outcomes for whatever he is working on at the moment. Our degree programs, urban planning in Buffalo, affordable housing for low-income groups, or even his golf game. He is a man of strong faith, devoted to serving the Episcopal Church across Western New York and beyond. He is cross-trained as an architect and an urban planner, but we have long claimed Al as a planner, one of us. We do so because of his commitment to bettering neighborhoods and improving housing, and together with the work begun by his late father, he has imprinted on Buffalo a vital legacy. He has vast knowledge of growth, decline, and resurgence in Western New York, and he's frequently consulted by our community leaders. He was instrumental in the launch of our Master of Science in Real Estate Development program just a few years ago. Many of you in the room had the good fortune of being a student of Al Price. Some of you haven't, but those of you who were not, hopefully what you have taken away from tonight is that Al Price excels in the classroom. This is where he really comes alive. It's no surprise that he is winner of the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Teaching Excellence. For our department, he took on large teaching assignments, and he provides students also with studio workshop experiences and any other types of courses that we throw his way. Yeah, we don't throw any courses away. Okay, I have to recover now. He teaches with his heart. He always has time for one-on-one mentoring and knows just what to say to students to bring out their best work. He has willingly volunteered to mentor early career faculty members in their teaching. This was particularly helpful to me when I began to teach large courses, and also to other faculty members looking to improve their classroom performance. As Professor Krishna said a few moments ago, he calls up new faculty and takes them out to lunch. Very classy. Here is a quote that we often hear from Al. A little bit of background history. This is usually followed by a brief or not so brief recounting of context for the issue at hand. However, I love these moments. His historical notes have helped us maintain our continuity in the School of Architecture and Planning and have kept us from repeating the same mistake twice. His input has also helped us innovate and challenged us to ensure that we are providing top-notch experience for our students. His teaching career has been exemplary. I have long admired Al's patience and wisdom, and I'm proud to call him a friend. We wish him much joy during the years to come in retirement, and he will take a piece of our heart with him when he goes. He won't be far away, though, and he has promised to stay connected with us. He will always have a home here in Hayes Hall. Thank you, Al Price. I believe we're very near the end of the evening tonight, and we have a gift that's coming from our faculty and staff to Al of a lot of goodies, and I think these are things that he loves.